Carlo Fassi was a man of great wisdom and tremendous energy. And both of these characteristics contributed to his incredible success. One of Carlo's special traits was his desire to not only teach the athlete, but also to enrich the person. He was as concerned about our schoolwork as he was about our jumps and spins. Many of us went to Carlo to perfect our school figures. Carlo not only taught me how to execute them perfectly, he also helped me learn to appreciate them and to love them. Being with Carlo on the ice was an adventure. He was constantly in motion, yelling out words and instructions, some of which we understood and others we did not.
Let me see one with the come on, that you got it going. Hop, hop, hop. One. Stand up with your head.
Sometimes he would shadow us, and I finally had to ask him to stop doing that because he made me laugh. But he continued to do it with other students.
Hop, 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 hop. Don't make, you're not dying.
Carlo supported all of us no matter what, win or lose. But when we were successful, he was like a little child. He would jump up and down and hug and kiss us. He was real infectious. And when he was happy about something, you were happy about it too. It was wonderful. You just loved him.
Na-na-na-nyan. Who had this beautiful music? Who put it on? What? You're kidding? I always had those crazy music.
The Ice Castle International Training Center proved to be the final stop in Carlo Fassi's coaching career. It is a journey that began 67 years ago. It's an odyssey he shared with his wife Christa for close to 40 years. It is a life worth reliving. There were no visions of grandeur when Carlo Fassi stepped on the ice as a child in his native Italy. He was sickly in his youth, and doctors recommended exercise as therapy. Since Carlo's grandfather was an electrician at the main skating rink in Milan, skating was a natural choice. Carlo's affinity for figure skating was soon evident. He claimed his first Italian junior title in 1942 at the age of 12. And his first senior title, that one in pairs, in 1943. But it was after World War II that he truly left his mark on the sport. He won 9 consecutive national titles and skated in 2 Olympic Games.
Carlo was just wonderful. When you'd see him, he would roar around the rink. A lot of speed, a lot of arms flying. I mean, it was almost like he was talking along with it. The arms would be flying, the music would be playing, the legs would be going. The skid of the foot going into an axle or a jump would leave a huge spray of snow, and not much would happen. No height, no distance. Carlo was not known as a great jumper, but there was energy and fun and excitement about his skating. It was very much like his life and his own personality. You couldn't take your eyes off it.
Fassi claimed a bronze medal at the 1953 World Championships and won 2 consecutive European titles. Then he turned his attention to coaching. It proved to be a momentous professional and personal decision. 4 years later in Davos, Switzerland, a 28-year-old Fassi met a 15-year-old German skater who would become his wife.
I knew pretty soon that he was the one that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Pretty much, not at 15, but at 16 for sure.
Carlo and Christa married in 1960. Christa continued to skate under Carlo's tutelage, and the 1961 Worlds were to be her final competition. Those championships were canceled after a plane crash claimed the lives of the entire U.S. team, skaters, officials, and coaches.
We came to the Broadmoor because the whole American team had just died in a plane crash. And so a lot of ice rinks in America needed new coaches. And we were lucky enough to be chosen for the Broadmoor.
The Broadmoor in Colorado Springs offered everything Carlo Fassi desired, but he was still hesitant to leave his homeland.
I really pushed him, and I was 18 at the time, and I was never been in America. I thought, great, let's go to America. And I convinced him.
From the moment they landed in New York, the Fassis loved their adopted homeland.
When Carlo and Christa came, we crammed all 3 of us into this 2-seater car and took off around New York. And it was a very pleasant time.
Carlo's impact on American skating was immediate. In just 4 years, he built the reputation that attracted the skater who would make him known around the world, Peggy Fleming. Fleming had already captured 2 national titles when she moved to Colorado Springs in 1965. She switched to Fassi in part to master her school figures, which accounted for 60% of the total score in her day.
Carlo was wonderful for me. Just going to the Broadmoor and having him, it was a wonderful combination because the ice surface was very good, and it had like a grayish color to it, so I could see my school figures. And then having, you know, the expertise of Carlo showing me those fine details, it made it like a piece of art. It made it look beautiful. It was a work of art when I was done.
Fassi revealed in his work with Fleming another important trait, the ability to work with parents. Peggy's mother was fabled in the sport and would attend practice each and every day. Carlo made her a valuable part of the Fleming team.
Mrs. Fleming called Carlo every night. I think it was even later than 6. It was like after dinner time. And he would stay on the phone. He would lie down on the kitchen counter with a pillow under his head and talk to Mrs. Fleming about the day past and the day that was following, what was supposed to be done, what we didn't do today. And sometimes those telephone calls lasted for an hour and a half.
Fleming captured her first world title in Davos, Switzerland in 1966 with Fassi at her side. The two were inseparable as she made her triumphant march toward the 1968 Olympic Games. There, they claimed the ultimate prize, the gold medal.
For me, I just sat there kind of by myself, waiting for the marks to come up, and I was like not out of breath. I was like in a zone. He had a way of showing excitement that was like a little boy almost, you know, jumping up and down and just hugging, kissing you, and it was like he was more excited than I was. You know, our Olympic win, I mean, he was so proud of me and so proud of himself. I mean, that was such a huge accomplishment to have his first Olympic champion. You can't do it yourself. It takes a lot of support to bring you to that moment, and it was wonderful that, you know, we shared that special time.
For most figure skating coaches, a single Olympic champion would be the achievement of a lifetime. But for Carlo Fassi, it was just the beginning. Fassi moved to Denver in 1973 and established a training center that attracted champions from around the world. It was a heady experience, both for the elite, established skaters who trained under Fassi and for the young, unproven skaters who flocked to his side.
I'm a kid from Dallas, and I show up at this rink in Denver, which is, at the time, just mecca of skating. You have Dorothy Hamill and John Curry and the Canadian champion and the Italian champion, and everybody has converged on this rink. And just watching that senior freestyle was so exciting. And I remember just wanting to go to the Olympics. That was really the first thing. So I guess, you know, this world-class environment, I think that Carlo created that.
In this period, another Fassi characteristic became most evident. In the 60s, he introduced team teaching to a sport where rivalries and insecurities made such a concept unthinkable. But in the 70s, he elevated team teaching to an art form.
Carlo was a wonderful chef. He had a lot of sous chefs around to hand him that cup of finely chopped parsley when he needed it. But he was the one that made the whole stew work.
Fassi would send his most prized pupils away to work with others, confident that they would return. The late John Curry was a skater of rare gifts, but his jumps were flawed. Fassi encouraged him to leave the nest and relearn how to jump.
John knew that he had to correct his jumps, and Carlo encouraged him to go to Gus Lucy to correct his jumps. Carlo didn't feel threatened by him going to another teacher. So many teachers today feel threatened if somebody else even looks at their pupil. They have to hold on to them with an iron grip because they're scared that they'll lose them. They don't have the confidence to say, sure, you're very good at teaching the shading of blue. I can teach all the other colors. Come on over and work with my pupil on the shade of the color blue. And John Curry went to Gus Lucy, corrected his jumps, came back to Carlo, and of course Carlo got the credit for his winning the Olympic gold medal. Pretty smart.
Carlo's most treasured collaborator was his wife, Christa. They shared a life together and were very much equals on the ice. While Carlo was more visible, Christa was always there.
Part of Carlo's magic was the fact that Christa was the greatest magician's assistant that ever existed.
The partnership allowed them to treat skaters as individuals and to adjust to the pressures of the sport.
Carlo would teach somebody and it would get a little bit tense, or they wouldn't listen so well anymore, so then we kind of just switched.
At the '76 Olympics, Dorothy Hamill and John Curry each captured the gold medal. At the 1980 Olympics, Robin Cousins claimed another gold. 2 Olympiads, 3 champions, each with their own distinct personalities and specific needs.
I really absolutely was facing burnout, and I think one of the great things about Carlo is that he could see that. He knew I needed a change of scenery and just something different. I think that was a great gift that Carlo had. He could tell when his students were getting burned out or needed a break or a change.
Perhaps Carlo's greatest contribution to the sport was the passion for skating that he helped instill in the hearts of so many of his students. It is a love for the sport that endures even decades after his skaters lived out their Olympic dreams.
It was the passion that drove him to limits beyond the call of duty, which is unfortunately probably the reason he's not here now. I think it would be a very hard person not to get something from that man and Christa that tells you that if you're not passionate and you don't love this business, get out.
Robin Cousins is fond of saying that there was no better diamond polisher than Carlo Fassi. And in the 1980s, Fassi once again uncovered jewels that truly sparkled. Carlo and Christa Fassi guided 2 men to Olympic glory, but their legend was built upon their unparalleled ability to transform young girls into the leading ladies of the sport. In the 60s, it was Peggy Fleming. In the 70s, it was Dorothy Hamill. And in the 80s, it was Jill Trenery and Karen Kadavy. Trenery and Kadavy joined the Fassis in Colorado Springs in 1984, and Carlo and Christa identified what each needed most. Carlo spotted Kadavy at a sectional competition. She had never skated at the Nationals, but Fassi saw the raw ingredients of a champion. The task was to turn Karen into a believer.
There, up, stand it, up. Good.
He invited Karen to come to the Broadmoor after he had seen her at the Midwestern Championships, and he said, this girl is wonderful, but she didn't perform well. And he said, it's impossible that a good skater like this will not one day perform well.
It's amazing when you think about it. When I think back then, you know, how far I've come and how much he believed in my skating.
Many who skated under Carlo and Christa became part of the Fassi family. That was very much the case with Jill Trenery.
Jill really needed to have a mother figure, and she took me really as her mother figure, and we got along wonderfully. She was like a second daughter to me. And Jill was a rebel, so sometimes she wouldn't get along with Carlo too well, and then I would take over.
Trenery developed into a 3-time national champion, a 1988 Olympian, and the 1990 world champion, while Kadavy medaled at nationals for 4 consecutive years and was a 1987 world bronze medalist. Each was a Fassi masterpiece, skaters who excelled at far more than triple jumps and brought both athleticism and artistry to the ice.
I felt he brought out the whole combination of putting my figures, my freestyle, the artistic, the technical together, and he trained it to the ultimate. I mean, I feel that that's what he did for me.
Carlo Fassi knew how to package a complete skater and would tell the world how good that package was.
He had great people skills. He was a great politician. There's no one ever has been the politician that Carlo Fassi was.
He was in the bloodline of figure skating, whether it be through his kids' training, through the parents knowing how much their kids are doing, to the judges knowing how good their kids have been, his kids have been skating the past 3 years, to telling a judge that he didn't agree with the result of a competition. I don't think Carlo ever said anything to anybody that he didn't have a valid reason for saying.
After Trenery captured the world title in 1990, the Fassis faced a difficult decision. He received an offer to return to the rink of his youth and nurture the Italian national team. And with his mother in failing health in Milan, the decision was made to return home.
To go back to Italy and leave the Broadmoor was a very tough decision. Partially it was because we knew that they were going to tear down the Broadmoor. The other reason was that Carlo's mother, he's an only child, he was an only child, and his mother was very ill. And so he wanted to be closer to her.
Trenery was the hardest hit.
She was devastated. She had no idea that that was going to happen. And yes, it was hard.
And there was another amazing talent that the Fassis left behind, one who brought a sparkle to Carlo's eyes. Nicole Bobek was first coached by Fassi at the age of 10. He was the father figure that Nicole had longed for, and they were together when she dazzled the crowd at the 1990 Olympic Festival. Bobek followed Fassi to Milan, but returned after a few months. Little did they know then that their paths would cross again. Lake Como was much as Carlo Fassi remembered it, but something had changed. Milan remained his birthplace, but it was no longer his home.
We got along with everything quite well for a few years, but then we realized that we were too much Americans.
The Fassis returned to the United States in 1994 and found a new paradise in Southern California.
When Carlo and Christa coached in Italy, they spent their summers here along the shores of Lake Arrowhead. This was the ideal setting. Lake Arrowhead is far removed from the distractions of the big city, and the Ice Castle Training Center possessed magnificent practice facilities. And the mountains and the lake surrounding it provided Carlo with the final ingredient he sought, inspiration. So when the decision was made for Carlo and Christa to return to their adopted homeland, Lake Arrowhead was the perfect choice.
There were no named skaters to nurture in the early years in Lake Arrowhead, but Carlo and Christa approached their tutelage of unpolished and unproven skaters with the same passion that had long been a Fassi trademark.
He was as joyous at a 13-year-old intermediate lady landing her first double axel at competition in CIA as he was when I did, you know, the triple-triple combination at Worlds that year. It didn't change.
A year ago, something did change. Nicole Bobek returned, and Fassi was once again in the national and international spotlight.
When I came back to Carlo, I was kind of in a stage where I wasn't really sure on what I wanted to do. And he made me feel so good with everything I did, even if I wasn't doing much on the ice. He just gave me such joy, and he never put me down or tried any reverse psychology things on me, and he just was straightforward. And I guess you could say he really brought back the love and the skating for me.
That rekindled love would become evident at the U.S. Nationals. Bobek had been plagued by injuries and poor training since her national title in 1995. She did not skate well in the short program. Nicole believed her dream of returning to the World Championships was over, but Carlo Fassi wouldn't listen to such talk.
I was up in my room and I was crying, and Carlo came in and said, "Now look, you get in gear here, you know? You can still make it." And, you know, just was really strong with me, and said, "You go out there and you just do it."
And she did. Carlo Fassi wielded his magic wand once again, and they received the prize they sought, a return to the World Championships. Carlo Fassi was once again in the spotlight. He was at the World Championships with one of the leading ladies at his side. He was back in Switzerland, where he fell in love with Christa, and where he guided Peggy Fleming to her first world title. But this time, the story was very different. On March 20th, Carlo Fassi suffered a fatal heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital, where he died at the age of 67.
I just went in and talked to him for a second and said, "I love you," and he said to me, "Go and see Nicole, practice." He didn't say it that clearly, but I could understand, "Go, Nicole." And so I said, "Okay," and that's the last time.
I was in the booth, and this face came around the curtain that I did not recognize at all, because I've never, as long as I've known this man, I've never seen that face on him before, and that was Dick Button. And he said, "Have you heard the news?" And that's exactly when I knew what had happened. And what I will remember is not that Carlo died. I will never forget Dick's face.
Nicole Bobek's face also told the story. 2 days after Carlo Fassi's death, she skated her long program. Christa Fassi was at her side, but there was little anyone could do to help her.
When I finished my long, it was weird because I didn't want to get off the ice. I wanted to do it again, to try again. And I just fell to my knees and gave a prayer to Carlo and apologized for not skating the best that I could, because I wanted to do better.
Nicole Bobek was unable to skate her best. She did not become Carlo Fassi's final champion. But that mattered little, for Fassi will be remembered not for his champions, but for his passion.
I think everybody remembers him best about how much he loved the sport. I can't emphasize that enough. And how enthusiastic he was every time people saw him. And it's just, they will not forget him, that's for sure.
He did have a temper, but you know, it was only directed if a skater wasn't working hard. You know, he got mad at me a bunch of times. Well, I remember once when he threw my record, we had records in those days, across the ice. And I'd never, that shocked me more than anything, because I'd never, ever seen Carlo do that. And I absolutely deserved it. I went into the rink and I didn't want to skate, and I was just having a terrible time. And he... So I was better behaved after that.
All of Carlo Fassi's students have stories to tell, and many of those tales involve Carlo's unique language, a combination of Italian and English.
There, wait, up, down. A little gone with the left, but already the check-in was good, okay?
There are many interpretations of some of his words, and I do remember, you know, him saying to me about pointed the fingers, and I was desperately trying to please him and pointed, and he was, "God, no, you don't understand, stop it. And he goes, "Pointed the fingers on the foots." And I was like, "Oh, my toes, point my toe, whatever."
Flip through the Fassi family album and one finds photos of Carlo with his students, far removed from the ice, and long after their competitive careers. Carlo always told Christa not to become too involved with their students, but he never followed his own advice.
You know, he made me feel part of his family. I really felt as though his family was my family.
When I used to stay at their house for like 1 or 2 weeks, if I wanted to go out, I always have to ask him, and would say, 10 o'clock, you have to be back. So they were also like my parents.
As I got older, you know, he was even more of a father. You know, you want to know who are you dating and who are you going out with all the time, and, you know, where are you going, and if I'd go down the hill, he wanted me to call him to make sure I got it down okay, and just stuff like that.
Fassi was as dedicated to his sport and his skaters as any coach, but he still found time for his wife, children, and grandchildren, and that created balance in his life.
Well, I think he wasn't obsessed with being a coach. He was a wonderful husband and father that, you know, he was always looking forward to going home and being with his kids and being with Christa, and they had such a nice, wonderful, normal life outside of skating.
Fassi was legendary for his storytelling, and his children and grandchildren were a constant source of pride.
I've heard from a lot of people that they said, "Oh, he just talked about you and your kids and Ricky and his kids endlessly," and that really touches my heart, because, you know, I knew how much we meant to him, but to know that he was out there bragging to the whole skating world about us, that kind of is really sweet.
And in recent years, his grandchildren provided him with a new audience.
He was a prankster his whole life anyway, so I think having a new audience was exciting for him. He could use all the stories that we all knew already on a new group, and they would laugh.
He loved being a grandfather. He was a great grandfather. I mean, all his grandkids were the light of his life. They really were.
And here is the table of honor, the family of Carlo Fassi, his children, Riccardo, Monica, and Lorenzo, and their families, and his wife, Christa.